Pressure's on.
Can't see your head.
Please be seated. Is we all back? Yes, sir. Okay, the court is now in session again in the case of Midland versus Danny Kosak. Defense ready to call this first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would first like to call Ms. Remy Hollis to the stand. Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Remy Hollis.
And what do you do?
I work as a band manager.
What bands do you manage? Or what does that entail?
I book and promote performances for different bands such as the Hound Dogs.
Have you ever booked a show with Alex Grace?
Yes.
How did you book that show?
I contacted Midland Television Studios through email.
When was the show scheduled for?
June 29th. Yes, June 29th, 2017.
How do you typically have your bands prepare for a show?
I usually have them drink water and rest up in their dressing rooms that they have prepared at any set for them during a performance, and I make sure they're comfortable.
Ms. Hollis, how did you prepare for the show Midlands After Dark with Alex Grace?
I got there around 11 o'clock to make sure the band equipment was in place, and once the band members arrived, I made sure they were in their dressing rooms preparing themselves for the performance.
Now, Ms. Hollis, I want to direct your attention to June 29, 2017. In preparation for the show, you mentioned that you had communication with Alex Grace's team.
Yes.
And what was your impression of Alex Grace's team in that communication?
Through email, I contacted and communicated with James and Clark, and he was very unorganized and did not do administrative tasks very well.
So when you arrived on set that day, what did you do?
I went to my dressing room, prepared myself, and then continued with the band, make sure the band equipment was set up and that the band members were prepared.
What happened next?
During rehearsal, I was looking down at my phone and I heard a screech, and I look up from my phone and a chimpanzee attacks me.
Backing up a little bit, what what was your impression when you arrived on set that day of what this show would be?
I thought it was going to be a typical talk show, and just with a couple of interviews and my being performed.
Why did you think that?
I was never told otherwise.
So when you arrived on set that day, you mentioned a chimpanzee. Was there anything to tell you that there may or may not have been a live animal on set that day?
No, there's no signs or plans anywhere.
So now I want to go deeper into the rehearsal. You said there was a chimpanzee attack. Could you talk to the court a little bit about that?
Yes, once I looked up from my phone, I heard a loud screech, and a chimpanzee was attacking a man named Chris Vendetta. And chimpanzee continued to scratch and bite his neck and face and claw.
Excuse me. And while this was happening, to your knowledge, what was Alex Grace doing?
I did not see Alex Grace anywhere.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, sir.
May I proceed?
You may.
Ms. Hollis, I'd first like to start with some conversations that you overheard on June 29th, 2017. You overheard a conversation with the defendant, Danny Kozak, and my client, Alex Grace, correct?
I don't recall.
Would you like me to refresh your memory?
Yes.
Permission to approach opposing counsel with
Don't
or
have to ask. You may approach counsel without asking.
permission to approach opposing witness.
You may.
Would Your Honor like a courtesy copy of the affidavit?
Do you have enough extra? Or do you need?
I'm sure. Yes, we do. Here you
Okay.
guys. Ms. Hollis, I'd like to direct you to page. Yes, to page 2, line 46 through 47.
Yes, I see.
In your own affidavit, which is your signature on the back page, correct?
Yes.
I would like to remind you that you did say that I heard a voice around the corner say, quote, "If things go sideways, it's on you. I'm just not 100% confident in him today."
Yes.
So you did hear the defendant say that to my client, Alex Grace.
Yes.
That's okay. Ms. Hollis, you also overheard a conversation with the defendant, Danny Kozak, on his phone, correct? Do you recall that? Ms. Hollis, that would be lines 60 through 62. You say again, quote, "But I did hear Kozak say, quote, I just have a bad feeling about it. I'm probably being too cautious. I'm sure it's going to be fine, but I can't shake this feeling."
Yes.
So you again heard the defendant say that.
Yes,
All right, Ms. Hollis, I'd now like to go to what you were doing at rehearsal. Permission to retrieve the affidavit from opposing witness.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. It's meant for me.
No, you can keep that one.
You're 2 steps ahead of me. Sorry.
Would you like me to wait for you?
No, no.
You're comfortable. Ms. Hollis, you took a phone call during rehearsal, correct?
yes.
And you were so preoccupied with this phone call that you actually walked off stage
Yes, I walked up to the side of the stage, yes.
because it didn't directly affect you.
I was on the phone with my promoter.
Ms. Hollis, you were also on your phone during the interview between the Chimp Elias and my client, Alex Grace, correct?
Yes, I was looking.
So you didn't see when Elias became agitated, did you? Because you're on your phone.
Yes.
Ms. Hollis, I'd also like to direct your attention to the rehearsal when the Chimp became agitated. You had previous observations of Elias in her dressing room, correct?
Yes.
With Danny Kozak.
Danny was not in the dressing room.
But you did see Elias in the dressing room, correct?
Yes.
You saw Elias jumping up and down.
Yes. Elias looked agitated.
So Elias looked agitated right before rehearsal, correct?
Yes.
Going back to the interview, Elias, right before Elias attacked the writer Chris Filifana, again, was jumping up and down.
Yes, but I was looking at my phone while the rehearsal was going on. There's Elias on stage.
But Ms. Hollis, when Elias, the chimpanzee, started screeching, you looked up, correct?
Yes.
And you saw Elias jumping up and down.
Yes.
You heard her screeching.
Yes.
And again, looking extremely agitated,
Yes.
just like you had before, directly before rehearsal started.
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay. Defense ready to call its next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense would like to call Ashley Thornhill to the stand.
Thornhill, I will remind you, ma'am, that you're under oath.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the board?
My name is Ashley Thornhill.
And what do you do for a living, Ms. Thornhill?
Well, I was a makeup artist at Midland's Television Studio with Alex Grace.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, you just mentioned Alex Grace. How long have you known Alex?
Well, I've actually known Alex for quite some time. I followed him here from Hollywood after I was promised a head makeup artist position at the studio.
And what did you start to do once you arrived here in Midlands?
Well, I never received that head makeup artist position. Instead, I just became a makeup artist for Alex himself and then basically a personal assistant.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, what were your duties at Midlands Television Studios?
Well, besides making sure Alex could function, I also had to make sure he was capable of being in front of a camera. And then I was constantly having to pick up his office and his dressing room because he told me that if there was any sign of alcohol, to be sure to hide it.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, I'd like to direct your attention to the day of June 20th, 2017. Do you remember anything strange about that day?
Yes, I was actually in Alex's office cleaning up as usual, and he was nowhere to be seen. And there was a phone call, and it was Kosak.
Now, you mentioned Kosak. Do you know who Kosak is?
I do. He was Elias the chimpanzee's trainer, and he was scheduled to be on the studio for a show on June 29, 2017.
And what did Danny Kosak say in this phone call?
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Counselor?
Your Honor, this is going to be an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033.
Wait a second.
I can get a page number for you if you'd like.
That would be helpful.
It'll be on page 10 of Midland's Rules of Evidence.
803.
8033.
One moment. And which part?
This is going to be the then existing mental state, which can go to show intent or plan. And if this, yes, sir.
Okay, and what was your question?
I'm asking her what Danny Kosak said, and if this statement is allowed to come out.
So if I allow you to present what the statement would be, what would it be?
It would be that the defendant is offering to exchange animals due to not feeling prepared with Elias, and that's going to show his intent and plan on switching out the animal appearing on the show.
Counselor?
Your Honor, this is not an exception to hearsay, as this conversation does not show an intent or plan. This is a statement of a request to the witness and not an intent or plan.
Counselor?
I would just feel that a request would have an intention behind it, otherwise there would be no reason to ask for something, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I don't think you've laid a foundation that this is going to be lay out a plan or intent to do something. It's just a question, so I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Thornhill, you mentioned Danny Kosak. Are you aware if Danny Kosak sent any safety guidelines to Midlands Television Studios?
Yes, he did.
And was there ever a safety meeting to go over these guidelines?
No, we never went over and discussed them or even really talked about them.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, I'd like to discuss the day of June 29th, 2017. Were you on set that day?
I was.
And what were you doing?
Well, I had gotten there earlier, and as usual, Alex was nowhere to be found. So I began getting ready, and Kosak showed up, and I still couldn't find Alex. So I went ahead and showed Kosak and Elias to their dressing room, and that is when Kosak gave me some guidelines to hand out to the staff.
Now, you mentioned that Kosak handed you guidelines. Were these guidelines available to the MTS staff before Kosak arrived?
Well, he did send the email, but we never went over them.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, what happened when you were escorting Danny Kosak to the dressing room?
He just handed me the guidelines and told me to be sure to hand them out to the staff that would be on set.
And what did you do with those guidelines?
Well, I didn't have time to do it, so I just handed them off to Chris to do it.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, what happened after that?
After that, Alex had finally shown up, so I got him ready for the show that day and then began cleaning up the office.
And did anything strange happen while you were cleaning up Alex Grace's office?
Well, there were papers everywhere, so I began organizing them, and I found a receipt for a bottle of wine.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
I need more.
The fact that this witness found a receipt for a bottle of wine does not make any fact in this case more or less likely.
Is Counselor, how is this relevant to this case?
Well, this is the day of the attack,
Yes.
and so it can go to show that if further testimony is allowed, that there is a bottle of wine of the same kind on this receipt found from Alex Grace. And it can go to show that Alex Grace had the possibility of being intoxicated during the attack.
Your Honor, she may have found the receipt on this day, but unless the receipt is entered into evidence or she can testify to when the bottle of wine was purchased, I don't think that this can be used to make any case in this, or any fact in this case more or less likely.
Counselor?
I do intend to enter this receipt into evidence to be used for that.
It's a bit of a stretch, Counselor, but I'm going to allow, because the bar for relevance is fairly low, particularly if you're able to connect it to something else. So I will overrule the objection at this time. You may renew your objection if he intends to introduce that as evidence. So I'm going to overrule it at this time. You may answer.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Thornhill, would you like me to repeat the question for you?
I will.
Did anything strange happen while you were cleaning Alex Grace's office?
Well, I was organizing the papers that were all over the place, and I did find the receipt for a bottle of wine, and then Alex came in and he just kicked me out of the office.
Would you recognize a copy of that receipt if I showed it to you today?
I would.
Approaching the opposing counsel with previously marked exhibit 19. Approaching the witness with the same. And would Your Honor like to courtesy counsel, please? Now, Ms. Thornhill, is this the receipt that you found that day?
It is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
It has not.
And is there any way that you can tell that this receipt followed the standard business practices?
Well, I can tell by the fact that the liquor store's name and address is on the top, and then it was signed by one of our interns that whenever we go get Alex something, we always have to sign it.
And has this receipt been changed or altered in any way?
It has not.
At this time, the defense would like to offer exhibit 19 into evidence.
Yes, Your Honor, I object on the grounds of hearsay.
Counselor?
This is an exception to hearsay under Rule 803.6. I can tell you page number for you as well.
Are you saying business record exception?
Yes, this is a business record. It has followed the standard business practices of the liquor store as an automated generated receipt. And furthermore, the receipt does not have a declarant and therefore is not hearsay.
Counselor?
Your Honor, in response to this being an exception as a business document, it does for letter B on page 11, that exception 6B, it was not a regularly kept business document. She just found it. It wasn't kept in any sort of record system for Midlands Television Studios, and therefore is not an exception.
Counselor, I'm going to sustain the objection on the grounds that I don't think you've laid the foundation if this is a business record exception. You may certainly go ahead and do that, although I don't know if she's able to establish that part.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Thornhill, you mentioned that there's an intern's signature on this receipt. Is this standard practice at Midlands Television Studios for any purchase made for the studio?
Yes, every time we go and get Alex anything, any purchase, we have to sign the bottom of the receipt to show which one of us did it and give it to Alex.
And this receipt was found in Alex Grace's office, correct?
It was, amongst all the papers.
At this time, I'd like to try to re-enter Exhibit 19 into evidence.
Your Honor, I still object to hearsay, and 6B has not been met because this receipt was just found scattered in a bunch of papers, not kept with any other receipts.
Well, Counselor, didn't she just establish that this is what they regularly do in their course of business? They keep these kinds of receipts and initial them?
Your Honor, I think she said that they regularly sign them, but I don't think she testified to regularly keeping them or putting them in any sort of place where she would be able to find them and know where they are.
Counselor?
Your Honor, the witness did testify that after the receipt is initialed, it is placed in the property of Alex Grace, and this receipt was found in Alex Grace's office.
It's a bit awkward, but I'm going to allow it. You may certainly attack it with questions.
Yes, ma'am.
This piece of evidence is admitted.
It is.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Thornhill, you mentioned earlier that you found a bottle of the same kind of this receipt. Where was that?
Yeah, it was in Alex's dressing room, and like I said earlier, Alex always told me to hide any sign of alcohol. So whenever I was cleaning it, I was instantly drawn to attention by it because it wasn't even slightly hidden.
And so, just to clarify for the jury, this receipt has the exact same type of wine bottle that you found later that day?
It is.
Objection, Your Honor, to improper character evidence. Leading, sorry. I'm sorry, I'd like to amend my objection to leading, this is a leading question.
I'm going to sustain that objection. You may rephrase.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Thornhill, you mentioned that you were cleaning Alex Grace's dressing room. What happened while you were in there?
Well, I found an empty bottle of wine of the exact same type that's on this receipt, not very well hidden by Alex.
Thank you, Ms. Thornhill. Approaching the witness to retrieve evidence, it will the courtesy copy suffice?
It will.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, did anything else happen while you were cleaning the dressing room with Alex Grace?
Well, as I was cleaning the dressing room, I started hearing screaming coming from the studio, so I became curious, and I went to go and see what was going on, and I was met by Alex, and he just looked at me and he fired me.
No. Ms. Thornhill, are you aware of why you were fired from Midland's television studios?
I honestly have no idea.
Ms. Thornhill, I'd like to go back and talk about the preparation that you took for having Elias on set while you still worked for Midland's television studios. Was anything off that day that you noticed in between cleaning the dressing room and Alex Grace's office?
Well, Midlands is always very disorganized, and it's very chaotic.
Objection, Your Honor, to character evidence to the Midlands television studios being disorganized. There has been no foundation laid that this witness can testify to this.
Thompson?
Your Honor, I don't believe that this is character evidence, but further goes to this witness's experience and rationally based perception of the events happening that day.
Thompson?
She is characterizing the television studio and Alex Grace's production as disorganized. This is not her perception on that day. She's characterizing the whole studio this way and is therefore improper character evidence.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think she's just giving us her rationally based perception of what the place is like. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Would you like me to re-ask that question, Ms.
I
Thornhill?
will.
Is there anything strange about the day of June 29th in the studio?
Well, the studio was super disorganized. No one really knew who was going to be doing what. In fact, an intern was supposed to hang up some signs, but I ended up having to do it because no one could find the intern.
And would you recognize a copy of that sign if I showed it to you today?
I would.
Approaching opposing counsel with previously marked at 16. Approaching the witness with the stand. And would Your Honor like a courtesy copy?
Please.
Ms. Thornhill, what did I just hand you?
You handed me the sign that I made for the studio.
And is it a fair and accurate copy?
It is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
It is not.
At this time, the defense would like to offer exhibit 19 of evidence, or 16 of evidence.
No objections, Your Honor.
So number 16, which is the Midlands After Dark sign, exhibit 16 is here.
Now, Ms. Thornhill, what did you do after making this sign?
Well, I was supposed to hang them up on all the studio doors, but honestly, I don't really remember.
Thank you, Ms. Thornhill. At this time, I have no further questions for this witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? Now, Ms. Thornhill, I want to talk a little bit about those guidelines that the defendant sent. Now, you received these guidelines in an email, correct?
That is correct, but as a studio, we never went over them.
That's right. Danny Kozak never held a safety briefing, correct?
Well, Midland's never even acknowledged them. We never talked about them or anything.
Ms. Thornhill, that was not my question. Danny Kozak did not hold a safety briefing, correct?
Neither did Midland's.
So that's a no to my question.
No.
Now, you received the guidelines in an email, yes?
Yes, that's what I said.
And Alex Grace would routinely get upset if not everyone read his emails.
That is true.
And so you not only read the email, but you read the attached guidelines, correct?
Yeah, but I can't attest if anyone else did.
Now, I would like to talk a little bit about your current employment situation. You were angry at Midlands After Dark, and specifically Alex Grace, correct?
Absolutely. He came up to me, fired me for no reason, didn't even tell me what happened on the studio that day. I didn't know Chris was killed until after.
And as of today, you still cannot find anyone.
Objection, relevance, Your Honor.
Your Honor, this goes to the witness's credibility and shows potential bias, which is always relevant.
I don't know how this goes to the credibility of the witness, rather that her testimony does not rely on the fact that she is no longer employed.
I think she's referring to bias.
To bias, I feel like there's been no foundation to show any bias that has been made.
What foundation would we have to establish?
I rescind my objection. Yeah.
Pardon?
I rescind my objection. Your Honor.
Okay.
So as of today, you still cannot find employment, correct?
I guess working with Midlands ended up just ruining my career, but I'm still holding out hope.
So you blame my client, Midlands Television Studios, and Alex Grace for being blacklisted in Hollywood.
Well, he did completely ruin my career. I was promised so much and I got nothing, and then he just fired me.
You even swore revenge on my client, saying that you would do anything for him.
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
Counselor?
Your Honor, this is a statement of intent or plan, and therefore is an exception to hearsay under Rule 803.
Counselor?
I feel like there's been no intent mentioned. Rather, this is just a statement that was made off the top of the head in a moment of anger, but not any intent to actually follow through on these actions.
I don't agree. I think that's clearly what this is going to do. I'm going to overrule the objection. You may ask a question, you may answer it.
You even swore revenge on my client, saying that you would do anything for revenge.
Well, at the time, I was furious. He fired me for no reason. Right before I even figured out Chris had died, I had no intention on going through with it. It was just a moment of anger.
And you told Chris Villafana's wife that nothing would honor his memory more than getting even with my
Objection,
client.
hearsay.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is that she said to Chris Villafana's wife that nothing would honor the victim's memory more than getting even with my client, Midlands Television.
Counselor, how's that not the same thing?
There was no action that was offered in here. This was rather just a statement that she was making of saying this is what would get even with Alex Grace.
Counselor?
This again is under Section 803 for intent and said.
So you're offering this for intent, for her intent?
Yes.
Secret intent. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
You told Chris Villafana's wife nothing would honor the victim's memory more than getting even with Midlands Television Studios and Alex Grace.
Well, like I said, I was angry after I was fired, so abruptly.
And you said that you would do anything to help Parker Villafana.
Well, like I said, I was very angry.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything further?
No redirect, Your Honor.
You may step down, ma'am. Thank you for your testimony.
At this time, the defense would like to call Danny Kozak to the stand.
You may proceed.
You state your name for the court.
Danny Kozak.
What is your occupation?
I am a caretaker at the Red Hawk Animal Sanctuary.
And what is your education?
I have a bachelor's of science in animal science from the University of Florida, and I graduated in 1995.
So you train animals?
I do both. I handle and train animals.
What qualifies you to train these animals?
I've worked at 3 separate facilities for the past 15 years: the Cincinnati Zoo, the Red Hawk Animal Sanctuary, and the Hardy Compound.
How long have you been training animals?
15 years.
Can you state any animals you train? What kind of animals?
I've trained 65 different exotic types of animals: lions, tigers, chimpanzees, of course.
How do you train these animals generally?
4 different ways: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, and extinction.
Can you elaborate a little bit on positive reinforcement?
That's whenever I give the animal something that he likes after he does something that I like.
How about negative reinforcement?
That's whenever I take away something the animal doesn't like after it does something that I like.
Extinction?
That's whenever I take away something that the animal does like after something I do not like.
And finally, punishment.
That's whenever I provide an aversive behavior after the animal does something I do not like.
So you train a chimpanzee?
Yes, Elias.
When did you get Elias?
October of 2013.
How do you train him generally?
Continuous positive reinforcement to fixed ratio positive reinforcement.
And where has Elias lived? Where did he live in his final years?
I bought him from the Hardy Compound back in 2013, so he's been in sanctuaries ever since, and he's lived in my sanctuary since 2013 until his passing.
Has he made any TV appearances before?
Yes, he's been in 18 TV shows as well as 2 films.
And, of course, Midlands, After Dark. How did you guys...
Objection, attorney testifying, Your Honor.
In what way?
The attorney just said, or opposing counsel, I apologize, just said that, and of course, Elias has been on Midlands After Dark.
And what is your specific objection?
Just to attorney testifying.
So you're objecting to the form of the question? Or
Your
the
Honor,
lack of a question?
It was a lack of a question.
I'm
I just
going to
asked
overrule that. You
Yes, sir.
can rephrase that and ask the question.
How did you come in contact with anybody on Midlands After Dark?
I reached out to Alex Grace a couple of years back through email, and then I was actually responded to, I think, by an intern a couple of years later.
And you accepted to be on the show?
Yes.
Objection leading.
Sustained. Try to ask him the question.
Okay. How did you prepare for the show?
I spent 150 hours at Elias training him to avoid large crowds and noises that go along with large crowds.
Were there any tricks that you prepared Elias for?
Yeah, I trained him to act as a normal guest, nod his head, shake his head, bury his head in his hands, smile.
Was Elias prepared? Was he ready for the show?
Honestly, I don't think I had enough time to prepare Elias for the show.
How did you feel personally going into June 29, 2017?
I feel that me and Elias worked a lot, but just to be extra prepared, I would have liked to have more time to train Elias for that appearance.
Yeah, let's move on to the day of the show. When you got to set Midlands After Dark, can you explain what happened?
Yeah, I went back to my dressing room and let Elias out of his cage for about 10 minutes so he could explore the area, get used to the setting, and then that's when Alex Grace walked in.
And then what happened?
Alex Grace was upset. He said that the show was dull and needed lightened up.
And was there any uncertainties going on?
Yeah, Alex Grace reeked of wine cooler specifically. And that's whenever he stumbled into me. And I think he had mistaken that for a hug, but I actually caught him and seemed pretty okay with it, so.
Yeah, let's move on to rehearsal. What happened at the beginning of rehearsal?
Everything was fine. Elias and I were on stage. I was getting settled into a seat and getting ready to go.
And then what happened next?
I walked off stage so I could begin with the performance using the hand signals, because obviously I wasn't going to be on stage with Elias. Like, the whole point was for him to be up there alone with Alex Grace.
And how did that go?
Not well. He started jumping and screaming, which had happened before, and I'd actually been able to handle the situation before. But unfortunately, Alex Grace had foolishly reached towards Elias, which caused him to run off stage.
And when Elias began kind of freaking out and ran off stage, what did you do?
At first I froze, and then without yelling, I said very loudly for everyone to stay calm and no sudden movements.
And then what happened?
Like I said, Alex Grace reached towards Elias, causing him to run off stage, and then attack Chris Wilfon.
In your opinion, do you think Alex Grace's crew was prepared for Elias?
I don't.
Objection, Your Honor, to improper lay opinion.
I'm asking for his opinion on basically if Alex Grace's crew was prepared.
Your Honor, the opposing counsel has not met the prongs of 702 for this witness to testify to any opinion. Therefore, this is an improper lay opinion because it's not an expert. He has not been established as an expert in his field of animal science.
I'm going to sustain the objection for lack of foundation. You may lay the proper foundation if you want.
Was there anything that could have helped prevented this incident from happening?
I believe that if Alex Grace and his crew were to follow my guidelines,
Objection to improper opinion, Your Honor. The witness is eliciting an opinion right now as to what could have been done to prevent the attack, which is an improper lay opinion as he's not established in the field.
Counselor?
I believe he is established in the field as he is training animals for 15 years and doesn't understand what can prevent this event from happening, and it is his animal.
Counselor?
Your Honor, there are 4 prongs in Rule 702, and at this time, I believe 3 of the 4 prongs have not been met. The only prong that has been met is A, that this individual has scientific knowledge based on his background, but B, C, and D have not been met. He hasn't shown that he has sufficient facts and data. It's the
You
product
don't
of
need to go further on. I do think you need to lay those 3 foundations.
Okay. And so how did you feel about Elias attacking Chris Wilfon?
I was very upset, obviously. That day we both lost Chris Wilfon as well as my best friend Elias.
And what happened after the attack, after Elias died and Chris Wilfon died?
After the attack, I locked Elias in the sound booth and secured him until the police arrived and he was shot dead on scene.
And how's your sanctuary now?
Gone.
No further questions, John?
Cross-examination.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Sir?
Mr. Kozak, you sent guidelines over to Midlands Television Studios for your appearance, right?
Correct.
And you recognized these guidelines if they were in court today?
Yeah.
I'm approaching the opposing counsel with what's previously marked Exhibit 23. May I approach the witness?
May.
I'm approaching the witness with Exhibit 23. Would Your Honor like a cursive copy, please? Approaching with Exhibit 23. Mr. Kozak, I've just handed you Exhibit 23, which is a copy of your guidelines, right?
Yes.
And this is the document that was prepared by you.
Yes.
It's in the same condition as when you first saw it.
Yep.
There haven't been any changes or alterations since the update on the last page on October 2013.
Yep.
At this time, Your Honor, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 23 in seconds.
The objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, so exhibit 23 will be entered for the plaintiffs as safety guidelines.
Mr. Kozak, you would say that these rules are very important to ensure safety.
Yes.
You would say that every single part of this document should be followed.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to the third paragraph of this document. It starts off with, if you have any questions. I'm going to read aloud as you read alongside me. If you have any questions about these guidelines, don't worry. My pal Danny will do a full safety briefing with your organization before my arrival. You can ask any questions you may have then. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Mr. Kozak, that safety briefing never happened.
That's correct.
So you broke your guidelines.
That's correct.
So how are you supposed to ensure safety if you're breaking your own guidelines?
By sending out this form, I figured that this would have been gone over, regardless of whether the meeting with myself happened at all.
May I approach the witness and retrieve the exhibit?
You may.
Now, on direct examination, you talked about your training, and you said that you use positive reinforcement, right?
Correct.
That you transitioned from continuous reinforcement to fixed ratio.
Correct.
To be clear for the jury, continuous reinforcement is where you give a treat every single time that animal performs a trick.
That's correct.
And then fixed ratio is where you give a treat every, say, 4 times that animal completes a trick.
Correct.
And so you like to transition from continuous to fixed ratio every time you try to give a new trick to Elias.
Correct.
But there are 2 instances where you didn't transition to fixed ratio.
Correct.
Now, the first instance happened in 2015 when you were set to appear on a show called Safari Trips, right?
Correct.
And at that specific television show, you also had an incident, right, with Elias?
Yes, correct.
Elias started to exhibit what you call a startle reaction.
Yes.
So he started jumping up and down,
Yep.
and he started screaming.
Yep.
Now, the only other time that you didn't transition to fixed ratio was for Midlands After Dark on June 29, 2017.
Correct.
And the same thing happened. Elias started jumping up and down.
Correct.
He started screaming.
Yes.
And then Elias attacked a rider.
Yes.
In fact, Mr. Kozak, you would say that you were not ready to appear on Midlands After Dark on June 29, 2017.
I believed I was ready, but as I stated before, I like to have extra preparation just to be sure.
Well, just to be clear, you didn't have all of the tricks ready on June 29, 2017.
What tricks are you referring to that weren't ready?
You mentioned that there were several tricks that weren't ready.
I didn't mention that.
That's your sworn testimony that you haven't ever mentioned that there were some tricks that weren't ready? Some movements that weren't prepared? recognize a copy of your affidavit, right? Or your deposition?
Yeah.
I'm approaching the opposing counsel with a copy of this witness's deposition. May I approach the witness with the same? Mr. Kozak, this is your deposition, right?
Yeah.
On the last page is your signature.
Yes.
And you were told before trial that you could make any changes to this document or any of your answers up until 24 hours before today's trial.
Yes.
So I'd like to direct your attention to line 312. I'm going to read aloud as you read silently. Question. Did you complete Elias's training by June 29th? No. There were a couple of minor movements that I had not confirmed that Elias would do. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
May I approach and retrieve the
May.
deposition? Approach and retrieve. Thank you. And Mr. Grace, you were even offered a later date. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Mr. Kozak, you were even offered a later date to appear on the show, right?
Correct.
But you went with the earliest date.
Yes.
And this is because your animal sanctuary was losing money quickly.
Yes.
And you had to get publicity to save your animal sanctuary.
Yes.
In fact, you would say you would do whatever it takes to save your animal sanctuary.
Yes.
So now I'd like to talk more about June 29th, 2017, the day you appeared. When you appeared on the show, or appeared at the set, Elias was aggravated, right?
Yes.
That morning he had scratched you.
Yes, he had.
He was getting upset in the dressing room.
Yes.
He was getting upset in the green room before you went on set.
Yes. Both of those rooms smell like chicken wings along the set. And last time he had actually smelled that scent, he was upset as well. It was along in my guidelines to not have chicken wings on the set as well.
So to be clear, you smelled chicken wings before you went into rehearsal, and you still went in anyways.
Yes.
You didn't notify anybody that this smell would be safe on set?
I actually did.
And did they responded? They moved the food from where it was, right?
Correct.
And then you were satisfied, right?
Not 100%, but I was ready to go on to the show by that
So
time.
you determined that it was safe to go on, even though that there was a smell of chicken wings.
No. In my guidelines, it says that there should be no chicken wings on set.
So you didn't go to the rehearsal. Mr. Kozak, to be clear, you said you smelled chicken wings before the rehearsal, and that was breaking your rules,
Correct.
and you said it wouldn't be safe, so you didn't go to the rehearsal.
I did go to rehearsal.
You did go to the rehearsal even though you smelled the chicken wings.
Yes.
You made that choice to go into rehearsal as an animal expert, right?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, there weren't any other animal experts on set.
Correct.
And to your knowledge, Alex Grace is an animal expert.
Correct.
He doesn't know what to do when an animal gets angry, right?
Correct.
So now I'd like to talk about that rehearsal. Now, when you came off stage, that's when Elias started to get upset.
Yes.
And after you didn't give him treats, he started jumping up and down.
Yes.
Started yelling.
Screaming, yes.
And then he attacked one of the writers of Midland Television Studios.
Yes, Chris O'Fonnell.
And this is very important. You watched this attack take place, and you froze.
Yeah, for about 10 seconds before I ran over to try to help.
So you froze for about 10 seconds.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kozak. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, sir. Thank you for your testimony. Anything further from defense at this point?
No, Your Honor. This time the defense closes the case in chief and started to proceed to closing arguments.
I'm sorry.
Uh,
I I didn't hear the last part.
We're ready to proceed to closing arguments, but we ask for a brief 5 to 10 minute recess.
I think that would be a good idea. We will be recessed for 10 minutes, but before we do that, I have to tell you a story. This because I think you mentioned about slowing down for me.
Oh, I just.
Wait a minute. I had 2 degrees in biology before I went to law school, and I spent one summer working with chimpanzees that know sign language. Seriously, this is in Washington State. And one of them, whose name was Washoe, was unbelievably good at it. I didn't know much sign language before I went up there, very little. And there was when we got up there, they gave us all a name sign. Mine was M for Michael on your cheek. And when Washoe would sign with me, she would slow down her signs. And I would still have problems, and she would say, Michael is stupid. 10 minutes. So humiliating.
Take my noodles down here. I didn't really eat my noodles here. Look at this. I didn't eat my noodles. In the bottom of it.
Just spewing random bullshit at me and I can't hear.
Hey, Chris, where they at?
So we are back in session in the case of Midland TV versus Kosak. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are at that part of the trial where both sides will give what is called their closing arguments. Once again, I will remind you that this is not to be considered testimony or evidence. With that being said, both parties ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
Then, Mr. McCloskey, you may begin.
Yes, sir. May it please the court, Your Honor, Mr. Bannock, and members of the jury. Entertainers, not animal trainers. Midland's Television Studios and Alex Grace are entertainers. They don't have expertise in any kind of animal science field, and the only person that had that type of expertise on June 29th, 2017 was the defendant, Danny Kozak. Now, this would be the first time that Midland's Television Studios hosted an animal on a live show. Midland's Television Studios, though, they were prepared. They took multiple steps to ensure this preparation. Today you heard from Mr. Alex Grace, the host and executive producer, who consulted 5 animal experts to ensure safety. After that, he took multiple actions to ensure this set would be safe. He took actions such as dimming the lights to the lowest setting, making sure that there was only a limited amount of people at the rehearsal, scheduling the rehearsal. He also posted signs around the set, and you heard this from the defense's own witness, Ashley Thorno, his makeup artist. But most importantly, he was sending those guidelines to his staff, the guidelines that Danny Kozak had distributed to Alex Grace. He distributed those to his staff through a listserv, and he also ensured that any guests that were set to appear also received those guidelines. Midland's Television Studios took every step to ensure safety. The only problem was the defendant, Danny Kozak. Now, at the beginning of today's trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Burton, came before you, and she asked you 3 very important questions. These 3 questions were asked to you because we wanted you, the members of the jury, to focus on these issues and find each particular instance that a witness brought up one of these issues. And so I'm going to answer those questions at this time. And that first question was, did the defendant properly train Elias's chimpanzee? Members of the jury, today the defendant came before you and told you the different types of training he uses. He typically transitions from continuous reinforcement. Our continuous reinforcement is which you give a trick to the animal, or a treat to the animal every time it performs a trick. And he would transition to fixed ratio, in which the animal would only need one treat for every 4 tricks. The only problem is for June 29th, he didn't do this transition. This means that Elias was expecting a treat every single time Elias performed a trick. Now, this was not the first time that this happened. This was actually the second time. The first time that Danny Kozak didn't make this transition was for a TV show called Safari Trips in 2015. It was also a time where Elias became aggressive. He started jumping up and down and yelling. Well, when we fast forward to June 29th, 2017, it happened again. Elias started becoming aggressive. He started jumping up and down and screaming. Every single time that Danny Kozak didn't make the transition from continuous reinforcement to fixed ratio reinforcement, Elias became aggressive. Danny Kozak was even offered later dates, and he declined those dates. And on June 29, 2017, he admits that he wasn't ready. So no, the training wasn't properly done. And so this takes me to my second question. Was Elias safe in public? Now today you heard from Dr. Willoughby Hawkins. Dr. Hawkins is an expert in primatology and has worked with chimpanzees extensively. She told you that the different demographics of Elias actually make him more prone to aggression. He had gone through puberty, and so he was likely stronger than the adult human. And he was also a male, so he was more prone to aggression and more likely to attack people. And finally, he had also been in captivity for a considerable amount of time. Because of this, he was also more prone to attacking people because he knew his strength in relations to humans. All of these factors contribute to Elias being more aggressive and able to sustain an attack that is more violent. Elias was dangerous. So, no, Elias wasn't safe for public. And this takes me to the final question, and probably the most important. What did Danny Kozak, if anything, do to control the situation? Again, this comes from the defendant. He told you that he froze. He was the only animal expert in the room, and he froze for about 10 seconds. Seconds. 10 wasted seconds from the only animal expert in the room. Members of the jury, that's if you believe that Danny Kozak's telling the truth. Because in reality, when you go back to deliberation, you will have this autopsy report. And this autopsy report says it was likely 30 times longer than what we just experienced. That this attack was likely a minute to 5 minutes long. And that's how long he stood and watched Chris Villafana, a writer at Midlands Television Studios, get mauled by a chimpanzee. And then Danny Kozak has the audacity to tell you that Midlands Television Studios is to blame for this attack. In today's case, there are 4 elements of negligence. Now, the opposing counsel and us, we have agreed to 2 of those. And so we only need to focus on 2 of those elements. The first is that there was a breach of duty. And the second, that breach of duty caused a direct and proximate It was the direct and proximate cause of the attack. That first is that there was a breach of duty, and that breach is very clear. Danny Kozak did not properly train Elias for Midlands Television Studios. But members of the jury, remember, when Danny Kozak took that stand, not only did he not properly train Elias, he also told you that he broke his own guidelines. He told you that he failed to hold a safety briefing after he said that the guidelines were so important and that's the only way he can ensure safety on the set. And that second element, that was the direct and proximate cause of the attack. Now, he was asked about this, about after not receiving a treat every single trip, Elias attacked. And he said yes. After Elias didn't receive these treats like he expected, he attacked. There's a pattern of this. This is the direct and proximate cause of the attack of June 29, 2017. Find Danny Kozak liable for this attack, because Midlands Television Studios are entertainers, not animal trainers. Thank you.
May I proceed? May it please the court. Your honors, members of the jury, opposing counsel. Alex Grace was reaching for ratings. You heard from Alex Grace himself that 2017, the year of this attack, Midlands Television Studios and his show, Midlands After Dark with Alex Grace, was experienced the lowest ratings that he had ever experienced as a TV host. It was because of this that Alex Grace had a trick up his sleeve. He wanted to make sure that something scandalous, something that would spike these ratings would occur when my client here, Danny Kozak, appeared on his show. Now let's start with a recap of what you all heard today and the story that unfolded on June 29th, 2017. It begins when my client, Danny Kozak, reaches out to Midlands Television Studios, offering to appear on their show. He was doing this because he's running a sanctuary, members of the jury. He needed money to provide safe places for these animals that he was rescuing and training. Midlands Television Studios then reached out to him a few years later, again, members of the jury, when their ratings were the lowest they had experienced. It was then when Danny Kozak agreed, and they agreed on the tricks that Elias the chimpanzee would perform on June 29, 2017. Midlands Television Studios agreed on what was going to happen that day. And it's because of this that they assumed the risk of having a live animal on set. Now, it was part of the plan that the defendant here would walk off stage and make hand gestures to prompt Elias on how to respond. It was because of, as soon as Elias became agitated, which had happened before, yes, we'll admit, but you know what happened last time that the opposing counsel didn't mention? Danny Kozak could control Elias that time. Danny Kozak made sure that there were no injuries at that time. He was able to properly handle and control Elias then. But there's one thing that was different here. Alex Grace reached towards Elias. Alex Grace reached towards Elias before Danny Kozak could calm Elias down. And it was in that moment that Elias leapt from his chair and attacked Chris Villafana. Unfortunately, Chris Villafana passed away from those injuries, and that is a tragic event. Now, in opening statement, my co-counsel Drake Baker came before you and he said that we had a duty to prove to you through a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that Midland's television studio breached their duty. So let's talk about that evidence, members of the jury. We first called Remy Hollis, a band manager who was on the set that day. Now, Remy Hollis mentioned she didn't see any signs that were posted warning about a live animal set on the studio doors. Now, we did hear from Ashley Thornhill that signs were made, but she doesn't remember if she put them on all the doors. This sign here, warning, live animal set. This sign gave notice to people that there was going to be a live animal on set. Except you didn't hear from a single witness today they saw this sign on any doors in the studio. You didn't hear from a single witness today that the one thing notifying that there was a live animal on set was even noticed. We then called Ashley Thornhill to the stand. Ashley had known Alex Grace for many years and worked for her and was a personal assistant and very close for Alex Grace. Ashley Thornhill mentioned that she found a receipt for a bottle of wine in Alex Grace's office. This receipt, right here. Now, members of the jury, the date on this receipt is June 28th, 2017, at 11:43 p.m., the very night before this incident occurred. And you heard from Ashley Thornhill that there was an empty bottle of wine found in Alex Grace's dressing room of the very same kind. Is that just some random coincidence, members of the jury? I don't think so. We then called Danny Kosak to the stand. Now, Danny said that he's been training animals for over 15 years. He knows what he's doing. Danny spent over 150 hours training Elias to ignore certain stimuli that could agitate him. But you know one stimulus that Danny Kosak didn't train Elias for was someone reaching towards him once he was already agitated. You heard from Danny Kosak that he smelled chicken wings and that there was a buffet on set. And you know what Danny Kosak did? He mentioned it to the people in charge to get rid of it. He did his part. He also made sure that he sent out the guidelines in advance. You heard from Ashley Thornhill on cross-examination that Alex Grace sends that out to everyone, and that if they didn't read it, Alex would be angry at them. Members of the jury, if everyone would have read these safety guidelines, they would have read where it says, the smell of food is very confusing for Elias. He is often rewarded with treats for performing his tricks. Please avoid eating or touching food for at least 1 hour before meeting Elias. Members of the jury, Midland's television studios knew about these guidelines, and yet they broke them. Now, the plaintiff would like you to think that Midland's television studios are entertainers, not trainers. And that's true. One thing that I find entertaining is how they think they can lie to you, members of the jury, and say that they did nothing wrong. Let's look at the autopsy report of Chris Villafana. If you look at the internal examination here, members of the jury, in the autopsy, the subject's stomachs still had his last meals in there, which included chicken. Members of the jury, Chris Villafana had eaten chicken wings that day, and they were the ones that put those chicken wings there. It is because of this that my client, Danny Kosak, is not liable. And that's why I'm asking you, members of the jury, to find Midland's television studios negligent and liable in today's case. Thank you.
How much time is there for, rebuttal? Are we time?
45 seconds.
Pardon?
45 seconds.
Rebuttal?
Yes, sir. May I approach? I'm approaching to retrieve.
Yes.
Exhibit 23. Members of the jury, Mr. Bannock came before you and said that Alex Grace was reaching. The only person reaching was Danny Kozak. He was reaching for revenue. He had to save his animal sanctuary. Now, Mr. Bannock also placed a great deal on his guidelines. He told you two in particular. He talked about food smells, and Mr. Kozak admitted that he smelled the food and he went on the set anyways. He determined that the set was safe. So Mr. Kozak concedes that the set was safe before he went on. And the second rule, reaching out. Now the only person that testified that Alex Grace reached out was Danny Kozak. More importantly, it's not in the guidelines. Find Danny Kozak liable. Because these guidelines were only broken by one person, and that's Danny.
All right. We're done.
There's always wrong too. Oh my God.
Oh, there's another. Okay, so look at these.
Wait, is that the homeless group? Yeah, you're fine. You're not in this, so you're good.
We were so close.
Oh, hey, do you want him to try to you got this. Okay, Tiana, let's have Tiana type.
And then whenever you go to answer,
Only cool people. Yeah, I mean, you can.
What's going on? Just vibe of the night.
We should make it as much of a. You don't have it printed out. Yeah.
What's our team number?
Resulting in realize yeah.
Oh man.
Tyler, you want to sit over here? You sit over here, I'll sit over there.
I like how that failed so quick. It was just so light.
Slightly bumped the table. He goes, oh man. He's like so confident.
Oh man.
Hey yo, so like when you're doing homework, you're gonna be paying attention to this.
Yeah.
You tell me like things that would be totally I'm trying to
Last name wrong. No, I
Okay, so we. So when it comes to direct, I mean, they're going to
I slowly turned into a stairmaster.
Doing Are you making your own app?
No, this is just the notes.
Oh, okay.
Generally, I wouldn't even use my laptop, but since she has her now.
Are you allowed to use a laptop in court?
No. Well, I mean, real life court.
Yeah.
You can generally have a laptop. Like you'll have a laptop.
Okay.
But for this, you lock up your hand.
Why don't they like make it realistic?
Well, like, why don't they let you do this?
Yeah.
It's just a
You know what would be
distraction.
really
This,
fun?
so in real court, you don't want to ever forget anything. And you need access to everything just in case. But this is not as that complicated. We should, a good team should know, like, memorize everything.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Damn it, this phone may or may not stay up.
There's a lot of pressure today, right? You know that, right?
What's that?
You know that,
Like, shove a credit card in here. A hacker boy.
The voice was right. I mean, the voice was on point. He said, dang it.
I can't believe I added
Your phone failed.
the dang it just matched the intensity of the.
I just wanted
Court, we don't use bad words.
Well, it's just funny that it was like it was a. Did you just like hit the desk? Like, it was an attack.
I just like how like confident you were that I was just gonna hold on. Like I see the Annie's like mac and cheese, like the setup over there is just perfect.
I got my credit card slid under here now, too. Y'all better not be hitting these tables. It's nice to the table.
Don't worry.
You guys ready?
Oh, you do that because you're afraid of Jesus watching it.
We're almost there.
Yeah, it's just weird.
My doctor, he had classic Dr. Yeah, he said he's like,
Whenever I look at them, it's like anybody can be looking at it. It's actually, it's not really hard to, and especially when you're like really, yeah.
I can't. I have to write this across.
Have you been to Top Golf yet? Have you been to Top Golf yet?
Yeah. Across.
Yeah, it's a fun place. That's my kind of golf, because you don't have to move and you don't have to do anything. You know, I'm actually good at that one too. It's kind of less.
Are you ready? Barry, do you want to sit up here as well?
Yeah.
Are we ready? Okay, court is now in session. Are there any pretrial matters before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor. Before we begin, may the plaintiff make party appearances?
Absolutely.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Bill McCloskey, and along with my co-counsel, L. Aronson,
Good morning, Your Honor.
and Anna Burton,
Good morning, Your Honor.
we represent Midlands Television Studios, and today representing Midlands Television Studios is Mr. Alex Grace.
Morning, Your Honor.
Now, Your Honor, we do have a few questions about your preferences. Before we begin, may we make use of the well as we please?
My well is your well. Feel free to move about the well. I only ask that you ask permission to approach opposing counsel's witnesses. Other than that, you're free to move as you please. Don't ask to approach my bench or opposing counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. And, Your Honor, for the purposes of courtesy copies, may they suffice as published and tendered evidence?
Absolutely.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff invokes Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all party representative, or of all non-party representatives. And today our party representative is Alex Grace.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, so we will invoke that rule. That means all witnesses, unless you are a party representative, you have heard nothing at all during trial today. Any attorney that references that with a witness that was not a party representative will be marked down accordingly.
Yes, Your Honor. And then finally, we do have some documents for your use. This includes the special instructions, the complaint, answer and counterclaim, evidence rules, Midlands case law, pretrial orders, and stipulations. Your Honor, the opposing counsel hasn't seen these documents, so I'm approaching for the opposing counsel to see these. And I'm approaching to tender the bench.
All attorneys, please note that if you're going to refer to the Midlands Rules of Evidence today or any of the Midlands case law, you need to let me know what page number it's on and give me a moment to look at it to make sure I know what you're talking about before I make a ruling. Is that understood?
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Anything from defense?
Yes, Your Honor. First, may we make appearances?
Certainly.
My name is Katie Espin, and I am joined with my co-counsel, Easton Bannock.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Drake Baker.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And today we represent the defendant in today's case, Mr. Danny Kosak.
Good morning, Your Honor. Just go back.
And at this time, I have some documents for you. I have the answer and counterclaim and the reply to counterclaim, and also the exhibit list in today's case.
And have you seen this?
Your Honor, I have it. I'll just take a moment real
May
quick.
I approach?
Yes.
May I approach the bench?
You don't need to ask.
Okay. And at this time, the defense has no further pretrial matters and is ready to proceed in today's case.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, this is the point of the trial where each side gets a chance to make what we call an opening statement. You are advised that this is not to be considered evidence. With that being said, is plaintiff ready to begin?
Yes, Your Honor.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. Entertainers, not trainers. The employees of Midlands Television Studios, or MTS, were exactly that. Entertainers, not trainers. June 29th, 2017 was going to be the first time that a live animal was going to appear on Midlands After Dark with Alex Grace. To prepare for this, Alex Grace set up a special rehearsal to ensure safety before a live studio audience. The plan was for the defendant to stand off stage and coach the chimpanzee while Alex Grace performed a mock interview with the chimp. However, when the rehearsal began, things began to go sideways. The defendant was supposed to be a trained animal professional who was going to bring a safe chimpanzee onto set. But on June 29, 2017, it became apparent that the performance was not what Midlands After Dark had expected, and what followed was anything but entertaining. The defendant moved off stage and put people in between himself and his chimpanzee. Then the chimpanzee started jumping up and down, screeching, and became violent. It charged off the stage at Chris Villafana an innocent bystander who just happened to be put in between the defendant and his chimpanzee. The attack was nothing short of horrifying. The chimpanzee viciously ripping into Chris Villafana as the defendant stood idly by, wasting precious time that could have saved Chris Villafana's life. Throughout today's trial, both the plaintiff and the defense will call witnesses to present evidence to you, members of the jury. You will hear from 3 witnesses today, including the defendant himself, and we anticipate that all 3 of these witnesses will tell you how the defendant stood there doing nothing while the chimpanzee attacked. We also anticipate that Dr. Willoughby Hawkins will appear before you and tell you that this chimpanzee was not fit for entertainment in the first place, and that the defendant's training was insufficient for the performance on June 29, 2017. But the defendant didn't care that the training was incomplete because he needed to appear on Midlands After Dark. He needed the publicity to save his beloved animal sanctuary, no matter what. Even if this meant not alerting Midlands After Dark of the potential dangers. At the end of today's trial, you will be asked to find one party liable. We, the plaintiff, bear the burden of proof in our claim, which is preponderance of the evidence. This means that if you find the evidence just over 50% in our favor, you must find the defendant liable. We must prove to you today that the defendant failed in their duty to my client, Midlands Television Studios, or MTS, to properly train his chimpanzee and failed to alert MTS of the risks involved. The defendant also bears a burden in their own claim. They must prove to you today that my client failed to follow instructions provided by the defendant to ensure safety on set. They will not be able to prove their claim. After today's trial, my co-counsel, Dylan McCloskey, will appear before you to go over the facts of this case. And just like no one forgot the screams of Chris Villafana on June 29th, 2017, I ask you to not forget these 3 questions. The first, did the defendant properly train his chimpanzee? Second, was the chimpanzee safe to appear in public? And finally, did the defendant do anything to control the situation? You will find out that all the answers to these questions is no. My client put their faith in the defendant. They had no reason to believe that there would be any danger. They're entertainers, not trainers.
May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Alex Grace was simply reaching for ratings. Because of this, she did not take the proper precautions to safely have a live animal on set. Harper Villafana will never see her husband again. Danny Kozak will never see his best friend again. And many people that day saw a brutal killing and are scarred for life. This is all because the plaintiff had so little regard for simple, given guidelines to follow. My client, Danny Kozak, is an animal caretaker. He provides a sanctuary for many exotic animals. And naturally, Danny has such an affection and talent for safely training and interacting with these animals. And in 2013, my client purchased Elias, the chimpanzee.
One of Danny Kozak's main goals in life is to promote conservation. He wanted exotic animals to be in the eyes of the people. So, in January 2016, Midlands Television Studios approached Danny and asked him to bring Elias on set on the show of Midlands After Dark with Alex Grace. Of course, Danny was excited and accepted this offer. And so, he knew that he needed the proper guidelines to be set forth with them. So they agreed upon tricks that he would perform that day in Midlands After Dark. He agreed with MTS. And although they trained day in, day out leading up to the show, Mr. Kozak knew Elias was a wild animal. He knew that everybody needed to know the proper precautions and safety guidelines to go through with this process. And so he contacted with them, got them the proper safety guidelines to look over, which were very important. But Alex Grace just didn't care. Alex Grace only wanted her ratings to skyrocket. So unfortunately, on the day, June 29th, 2017, during rehearsal, Elias seemed agitated with the set. Along with other factors, Elias got very upset and unfortunately attacked a crew member, Chris Villafana. Chris Villafana passed away from this attack, and later Elias was also killed by police. 2 deaths in one day that could have been prevented. And so, today, the plaintiff has the burden of proof. They have the burden of proving by preponderance of evidence that Danny Kozak was negligent. We are confident they did not do that. So today, we have the burden of proof by proving by preponderance of evidence that Midlands Television Studios breached their duty to Danny Kozak. To prove this today, we will call 3 witnesses. First, we will call Remy Hollis. He was a band manager for the Hound Dogs, the band that was scheduled to perform that day on set. He'll give us eyewitness testimony on what happened that day. And next, we'll call Ashley Thornhill, Alex Grace's personal assistant for many years. And she will talk about Grace's behavior and how she did not take the proper precautions. And finally, we'll call Danny Kozak, the trainer for Elias. He will also share with you how he did everything in his power to make sure nothing happened and that it was safe to have a live animal on set. At the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Easton Mag, will come before you and show you that Danny did, in fact, do everything in his power to make sure everything was safe. And he will show you that Danny Kozak was not negligent and is not liable. Thank you.
Prosecutor, ready to call his first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls for the witness.
You proceed, sir.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Hunter Cooper.
I'm sorry.
Hunter Cooper.
Hunter Cooper.
And what do you do for a living, Ms. Cooper?
I'm a screenplay writer. The past few years I've been focusing on writing Alex Grace in my career starting piece for Hollywood.
How did you go about writing this screenplay?
Well, I would do research, so I would sometimes follow Alex at the gym or to the grocery store or watch him through his little window right above his bed. Sometimes I would go through his garbage too.
So, have you ever appeared on the set of Midlands After Dark with Alex Grace?
I go there all the time. I like to watch him from under the bleachers.
Were you there on the day of June 29th, 2017?
Yes, I was.
Were you there for the performance starring the defendant, Danny Kozak, and his chimpanzee Elias?
Yes, I was.
Where were you during this performance?
I Again, I was hiding under the bleachers so I could get an unbiased view of Alex.
Why were you underneath the bleachers?
Well, if Alex sees me, it might make him behave differently, so I can't let him watch me.
How did this performance begin?
Well, and Alex went out on stage and took his seat behind his desk, and Kozak followed out. I noticed when Kozak came out that he had bandages on his arm that weren't there that I had seen earlier in the day. And Alex started doing what Alex does best, being charming and asking all these great questions. Then that trainer got up and left that thing on stage with my Alex by himself.
So the defendant walked off stage. Was he standing about as far away as I am from you?
No, he was even further than that.
So, about here.
No, he was like 20 feet away.
Okay, what happened after the defendant moved off stage?
Well, Alex asked a couple more questions, then the thing started hopping up and down in its seat and making all these noises, and then it charged, running towards what I thought was Kozak, but ended up being the writer, Chris.
Now, did you hear the defendant say anything about the rehearsal?
Well, I heard Kozak say before rehearsal that he needed to give Elias something to get through this, and it can't be like last time because Elias is different now, and that there's a good thing there isn't a studio audience, and if anything bad were to happen, Alex Grace would get what he deserves.
Now, this is very important. Did you ever hear the defendant admit to doing something wrong at the rehearsal?
I heard Kozak say that he was sorry for what Elias had done and that he should have never been so far away doing a new trick.
When the attack was taking place, where was the defendant standing?
He was standing by Chris when the attack happened.
And what was the defendant doing?
Nothing from what I could tell. There was no hand signals going on anymore. There was no talking. I don't even think he was moving.
Thank you. No further questions.
Is this good? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, yes. Good morning, Ms. Cooper. I'd like to start out by talking about your history with Alex Grace. She is your favorite actor. He is your favorite actor, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you conduct research on him?
Well, yeah, whenever you write a good screenplay, you need to do your research first.
It's true that you follow him around?
Yes.
To his work?
Yes.
You've even been to his home?
Yes.
Ms. Cooper, I want to direct your attention to the show that you attended on June 29, 2017. You snuck on set that day, is that correct?
Yes.
And when you got on set, you noticed that there was a buffet set up, including chicken wings?
Yes, there was a buffet set up, and Alex graciously moved that buffet away when it was brought to his attention.
But there was still food on set that day?
Yes.
And when you arrived on set, you also noticed that Danny Kosak was agitated.
Yes.
And that was because Alex Grace kept asking questions about how much contact with Elias is okay.
I believe it was something.
And he was also agitated, to your knowledge, because of the food being on set.
Yes. Kozak had an issue with how close the food was, and it was very rude to Alex, but he moved it away because he's a professional.
But to your knowledge, Danny Kosak still had an issue with this?
Yes.
And you even heard Danny Kosak talk about how he gave Midland Television Studios guidelines.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
This is effect on the listener.
In what way? So you're not offering it for truth of this matter asserted, just what effect it had on the listener, right?
Yeah, because this witness in this scenario was listening to the conversation that was taking place between Danny Kosak and Alex Grace.
Counselor?
Your Honor, this statement is being offered for its truth value in that the defendant told Alex Grace in a response to what Alex Grace wanted to do with the chimpanzee on set.
Counselor?
This is actually going to be talking about the guidelines that Danny Kosak provided to Alex Grace. It has nothing to do with what Alex Grace wanted to do with Elias on the show.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
This witness was not there for the conversation and therefore only overheard it and therefore cannot testify to the effect that it had on Alex Grace or its effect on the listener.
I'm not sure what that means. I'm going to allow it, but I will instruct the jury not to take it for the statement made only as to its effect on the listener. So I will overrule the objection. I will allow it.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Cooper, you heard Danny Kosak refer to his guidelines that he provided to Alex Grace, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Because Alex Grace kept asking questions about how much contact is okay with Elias.
Something along those lines, yes.
Now, I want to direct your attention to the gruesome attack that happened at that rehearsal. You saw it go down, is that correct?
Unfortunately, yes.
And as this attack was happening, to your knowledge, Alex Grace was nowhere to be found, is that right?
That's correct. After Chimpanzee ran off, I didn't see Alex, but...
And to your knowledge, you saw no one with Midlands Television Studios do anything to try to stop Elias?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Then you redirect.
No, Your Honor.
You may step down so you can do your testimony. Please call your next witness.
At this time, Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Dr. Lily Hawkins. Please state your name for the clerk.
Good morning, my name is Dr. Willow Hawkins.
Dr. Hawkins, what do you do for a living?
Well, right now, I'm the Amber Lowry Professor and Chair of Anthropology at Midland State. This semester, I teach a couple courses, evolutionary anthropology, primatology, and animal psychology. Since we're just getting back from winter break, I'm pretty excited to have some fresh faces in class.
Dr. Hawkins, can you tell us a little bit about your academic background?
Yes, well, I was one of those little girls who figured out exactly what she wanted to do right out of 5th grade. And Jane Goodall was coming out with her research at the time in the 60s, and I knew I wanted to be exactly like her. So I double majored in biological anthropology and animal psychology, and then I got my PhD in primatology.
Are you published in your field?
I am. I've published over 30 articles now at this point.
Dr. Hawkins, do you have any direct field experience with primates?
I do. When I was writing my dissertation, I spent 2 years in the field at a sanctuary in New Jersey.
Dr. Hawkins, why are you here today?
Well, I was retained by the plaintiff to come to some conclusions about the choice of Elias as a performance chimpanzee and the training that the defendant gave Elias.
What sort of materials did you review before coming to court today?
I reviewed 2 depositions, an affidavit, and some exhibits that were part of the case.
Were these materials that you reviewed sufficient for coming up with any conclusions that you might have for today's case?
Yes, they gave me everything I needed to know.
And what methods did you use in order to review these materials?
Well, I used a method that's called the traits and training method, and it's a two-pronged approach that allows professionals to analyze the demographic traits of an animal and the training that the animal has in order to determine if it's suited for entertainment.
And are these methods that you use widely used in your field of study?
Yes.
And what were the conclusions that you had stated before that you came up with for today's case?
Well, first I analyzed the demographic traits of Elias the chimpanzee.
Or were there any factors or any other conclusions that you came up with?
Yes, well, in analyzing demographic traits, there are a couple that are particularly important, and those are age, gender, previous environment, and history of aggression.
So let's start with age. Can you break that down for me?
Yes, in chimpanzees, they typically come to puberty around the age of 6 for males, and at that point, the chimpanzee develops a lot of brute force strength. They develop sharp claws and teeth and become much stronger than humans. Now, Elias, in particular, was 10 years old at the time of the attack, which means that he was very likely all the way down to puberty. He was very developed physically.
After age, what is the second factor?
The second factor is gender. Male chimpanzees are typically much more aggressive than female chimpanzees, which means that they pose a much higher physical risk to humans. Elias was a male chimpanzee, which means that naturally he was predisposed to being aggressive towards humans.
So after age and gender, can you go through the third one?
Yes, the third factor is previous environment. Now, contrary to popular belief, the longer a chimpanzee spends in captivity, the more aggressive they become towards humans. And this is because they have more time to realize that they're a lot stronger than us. Elias had spent around 4 years in captivity, which was plenty of time for him to realize that he could overcome any person he wanted to.
Dr. Hawkins, you've gone through age, gender, and previous environment. And you said there was a fourth one?
Yes, the last factor that we look at is history of aggression. Now, chimpanzees who haven't been violent in the past, that doesn't mean that they can't be violent in the future. And any incidents of aggression or unruly behavior in the past sets up a red flag for future violence. When I analyzed the documents in this case, I noticed that Elias had actually exhibited unruly and aggressive behavior on a television set similar to Weapons After Dark a couple years prior. And that is a red flag for future violence, which in this case did occur.
Dr. Hawkins, did you review anything else for this case?
Yes, I also analyzed the training that the defendant, Danny Kozak, gave Elias.
And how do experts usually train chimpanzees?
Well, the best method is to use positive reinforcement on a continuous and then switching to a fixed ratio schedule.
And is this standard practice?
It is, yes. It's the best way to train chimpanzees.
Dr. Hawkins, in reviewing your materials, did the defendant follow these methods?
Not quite. I'm aware that the defendant trained Elias using voice commands before coming onto set, but the defendant planned on using hand signals on the set, and with hand signals actually performed 0 hours of training with Elias on the fixed ratio schedule.
Why is it important that the defendant didn't use training for the fixed ratio schedule?
There's 2 parts to positive reinforcement, continuous and fixed ratio. And fixed ratio is important to transition to because it's the part that most significantly reduces the chances of a startle reaction.
You just mentioned a startle reaction. What is that?
A startle reaction is simply when an animal becomes agitated because of frightening or unfamiliar stimuli.
Is this what happened on June 29, 2017?
Yes, it is. Elias entered into a startle reaction and from there went into fight or flight mode and chose to fight.
Dr. Hawkins, in your materials that you reviewed, did you review Chris Philippon's autopsy?
I did.
Would you recognize a copy if you were shown so today?
I would.
Approaching the opposing counsel, with what has been previously labeled Exhibit 5. Approaching my witness to the scene.
Thank you.
Would Your Honor like a courtesy copy?
Please. Thank you.
Dr. Hawkins, is this a fair or accurate representation of what you reviewed?
Yes, it looks to be about the same.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
Not that I can tell.
Motion to enter exhibit 5 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you because in my court you have to stand to be heard.
No objection, Your Honor.
I appreciate that. So exhibit 5, which is the medical examiner's report, will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Hawkins, did you notice anything about this report?
Yes, in reviewing it, one thing in particular stood out to me, and that was that the attack lasted between 1 and 5 minutes.
Dr. Hawkins, why is it important that the attack lasted 1 to 5 minutes?
In my expert opinion, an attack that lasted up to 5 minutes is clear evidence of Elias the chimpanzee's brute strength. He should never have been led onto a set of Midlands After Dark in the first place if he posed this much of a risk to humans.
Finally, Dr. Hawkins, was this attack preventable in your expert professional opinion?
Yes, all of Elias's demographic traits, his age, his gender, his time spent in captivity, and his history of aggression, as well as the incomplete training that Danny Kozak provided Elias, all pointed to him never having been led onto the set in the first place. He never should have been there.
I have nothing further, Your Honor. Pushing my witness for the evidence.
You may approach. Mr. Baker, cross-examination, sir? Sure. You may proceed.
Good morning, Dr. Hawkins.
Good morning.
So let's get into your education a little bit about your background. You've studied animals, correct? Pretty quite a bit.
Yes, I've dedicated my life to chimpanzees.
But you've never actually trained any animals?
Actually, I spent 2 years doing field research at a sanctuary while I was writing my dissertation.
Did you train them though?
I handled them and was part of their training, yes.
And did you actually study chimpanzees?
Yes, I specialized in a PhD in primatology.
Did you train any of those?
Yes, as part of my field research while I was writing my dissertation, I worked with chimpanzees.
Let's get into the life of a chimpanzee. So they don't fully mature until they're 11 or 12, correct? Males?
Well, that's when they reach the end of puberty, but they start puberty around the age of 6.
You said they start puberty around the age of 6 to 7. Is it true that only 80% actually reach maturity at that age?
Well, the whole 80% of male chimpanzees start puberty around the age of 6, yes.
But there are things such as a late bloomer, correct?
Yes, some chimpanzees, like humans, start puberty a little bit later, so sometimes around the age of 7.
And so if Elias was a late bloomer, he probably would have been less violent, correct?
It's possible that Elias could have been a late bloomer, but like I said, 80% of male chimpanzees aren't late bloomers.
So you never actually met Elias though?
No, Elias was put down immediately after the attack.
And you actually weren't on set that day of the attack, correct?
No, I was not.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, we just asked that our witness can step down.
You don't have to ask that. I'm not going to make you stay here all day. You may step down. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. McCloskey, you ready for your last next? Sounds like final. For your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Alex Grace to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Certainly.
Please state your name for the court.
Alex Grace.
Where are you from, Mr. Grace?
Originally, I'm from Beverly Hills, but for work-related reasons, I currently reside in Midlands.
And what do you do for work?
Well, I like to think of myself as an entertainer. I've been a host of many TV shows, been in movies. I even did theater back in the day.
So what kind of shows have you been in your past?
Well, it all started back in middle school when I was first in the tree in the Wizard of Oz play. You know, back then I really only did theater to see my mom so proud of me. She would come to every single show, sit front row. You know, and I kept doing theater in middle school, high school, college, and then eventually I landed a lead in Dogs. And that's when I met Michael Bay. He came to our opening performance and loved it so much that he offered me a role in Friday the 13th. But I was killed off in the first 5 minutes, so I guess my face was sickly enough for that. But if it wasn't for that, I would never have met the president of Midland's Television Studios. And from then, it's pretty much history.
Mr. Grace, you just mentioned you met the head of Midland's Television Studios. How long have you been working there at MTS?
It's been 4 years. Back in 2013, I was hired, and it's funny because at the time I was actually offered another job at the Oprah Winfrey Network, but they weren't as established yet, so I went with Midland's.
So now I'd like to transition and talk a little bit more about today's case. When did you first meet the defendant?
Yeah, a while before 2017, Danny had been emailing me asking to appear on the show with Elias, but I respectfully declined.
Mr. Grace, did you ever invite the defendant at a later date?
Yeah, it's funny. I ran into an intern one time. They were watching a video of Elias on YouTube, and everyone was obsessed with this video. I thought it'd be good for ratings, so I dug up the emails and then emailed Danny back after that to come on the show.
Did you ask for anything in particular from the defendant?
Yeah, initially we had agreed upon Elias appearing on the show, but after a while, Danny had started asking to bring more dangerous animals on the set.
Objection, hearsay.
I'm sorry?
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
Counsel?
Your Honor, the statement that's being elicited by my witness right now is a statement of the party opponent, the defendant. The statement right now is he asked to bring more dangerous animals. So this statement is actually not hearsay pursuant to Rule 801D2D.
Who is the declarant?
The declarant is the defendant, Your Honor.
Mr. Kozak.
Yes, Mr. Kozak.
Counsel, your response?
I stand by my objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think that exception hearsay does apply.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may ask a question. You may answer.
Yes, sir. So what was the defendant telling you about not bringing the lions?
Yeah, so after a while, then he had started asking if he could bring more dangerous animals, like tigers, lions, but I didn't want dangerous animals on my set, so I said you had to stick with Elias.
Mr. Grace, were you concerned with safety on your television studio?
Oh, of course, safety. Yes, one time, well, the most dangerous act I've ever had on set was probably when Steve Carell came on with a pair of scissors trying to teach me origami. I got a paper cut, but I actually ended up taking his scissors away. Yeah.
So what actions, not for the Steve Carell event, but what actions did you take for Danny Kozak's arrival of the animal trainer in which you were trying to prepare for safety?
Yeah, so for this performance, we used a document titled Best Practices with Live Animals in the entertainment industry. And this document asks us to consult with an animal expert. So we actually consulted with 5 animal experts. Additionally, we dimmed all the lights during the performance. We reduced the number of people on set. And instead of doing the whole thing live, we set up the whole pre-recorded rehearsal to ensure that the chimp was more comfortable.
So I'd like to transition and talk about the actual incident. What day was the defendant set to appear on your studio?
That was June 29th, 2017.
And how did that day start?
Well, I was in my office and I heard these terrible screeching sounds, and I thought that was strange because I knew Will Ferrell wasn't around doing his bird calls that day. But then I went to the dressing room to check, and Danny and Elias had arrived.
Did you have a conversation with Danny at that time?
Yeah. It was I think it was about 11:30 when I checked in on his dressing room, and he wouldn't stop thanking me for letting him come on the show. He even said something like, "I need to appear on this show no matter what." And that's when Danny reached in for a hug to keep thanking me, and I noticed there were scratch marks all up and down his arms. But when I inquired about them, he assured me that Elias wouldn't hurt a fly.
So earlier you mentioned that there was a pre-recorded rehearsal. When was that set to take place?
That was set for 2 o'clock, but I think it ended up starting around 2:20. You see, I ran into my good friend AJ in the hall and we were catching up. One time when my wife was in surgery, she made us this 4-cheese lasagna, and it was delicious. So needless to say, she'll always have a place, not only in my heart, but in my stomach.
So how did this rehearsal start with the defendant?
Yeah, well, at first, everything was going normal, standard as planned. Danny and Elias sat across from me, and we were just doing basic interview questions.
Did anything happen that caused Elias to become agitated?
No, not everything was going normal. That didn't happen until after a few minutes when Danny got up and went off stage. And I don't remember exactly where Danny was on stage, but I remember when I looked over, he was standing behind my writers, including Chris. And Chris he was one of my favorite writers. He helped write that mean tweet segment where I read mean tweets about myself, and the audience loved it. And that was all thanks to Chris.
Transitioning, talking about Danny coming off that set, what happened next?
Well, Danny was off set doing hand signals. I remember that, but after a few minutes, that's when Elias got on the chair and started screeching.
What were you doing when Elias the chimpanzee was screeching?
I just stopped. I froze.
Could you see what the defendant was doing?
I remember glancing over and Danny just stood there. The hand signals had stopped. He wasn't doing anything to help.
What happened next?
Well, that's when that's when the chimp went after Chris and started attacking him. And I immediately dropped down under my desk.
Mr. Grace, from under your desk, could you see what the defendant was doing?
Yeah, there's an opening. The desk, I could see Danny just stood there and watched. The hand signals had stopped, and just watched Chris get mauled.
What happened next?
I stayed under my desk, and the screams went on. Chris's screams went on for a horrendous amount of time, but eventually the paramedics and police arrived. By then it was too late. Chris was already gone. I still can't believe Chris is gone.
Thank you, Mr. Grace. No further questions, Your Honor.
Manning?
Yes, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Grace. I'd first like to start off by talking about your career. You started off by working as an award-winning Broadway star, correct?
That's correct.
And then you transitioned into TV after that, correct?
Yes.
And then after you were in TV, that's when you first made your appearance into the silver screen Hollywood movies, correct?
Yes.
And you had a film, Rocking Leo, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And this film wasn't as successful as you would have hoped it to be, correct?
Not quite.
Objection to relevance, Your Honor?
Thompson?
Your Honor, this is going to continue to show that there's a pattern of low ratings in this witness's line of career, which will go to establish a possible motive for being negligent in this case.
Low ratings is a motive for being negligent?
Yes. Relevance, I would also like to remind you that relevance is a relatively low bar, and that these low ratings we're going to cause the mindset of this witness to do more negligent acts in order to increase ratings and allow this show to continue.
Counsel?
Your Honor, low ratings for a movie that appeared in 2013, 5 years before this incident, doesn't make a fact more or less likely in this case. This case surrounds a television show called Midlands After Dark, not a movie. And so these movie ratings don't make a fact more or less likely for either party, and therefore they're just not relevant. Even if that bar is low, you still have to get over the bar, Your Honor.
Counsel?
Again, this is going to establish a pattern of consistent low rating events happening in this witness's career.
Okay, I'm going to allow the question with the caveat that if he fails to show a continuing pattern, that you may renew your objection and we may strike.
Yes,
So I'm going to overrule the objection at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Grace, I'll repeat myself. Rocking Leo wasn't as successful as you would have hoped it to be, correct?
Correct.
And after this is one of the things that prompted you to switch to Midlands Television Studios, isn't that right?
Among other factors, yes.
And in 2017, the year of this event, Midlands Television Studios had, your show, Midlands After Dark, had received the lowest ratings it had ever experienced as a host, correct?
That's correct, although it was to be expected, hitting a dip in ratings. It's well within the rating cycle, especially since it was summertime. Parents are home with their children, not always able to tune in as often as we'd like, but nothing extremely out of the ordinary.
Mr. Grace, that's a yes to my question. 2017 were the lowest ratings you had ever experienced as a host?
Yes, within this cycle as anticipated.
Now, Mr. Grace, I'd like to talk about the events on June 29, 2017. You were there during the rehearsal, correct?
That is correct.
And once Elias became agitated and started jumping up and down, you hid under your desk, correct?
That is correct.
And you stayed there until after the police arrived.
Correct.
Now, after this attack, you wrote a letter to Chris Villafana's spouse, Harper, with some flowers. Isn't that correct?
I don't recall writing a letter.
But you would recognize that letter if I showed it to you today, right?
Again, I don't remember writing a letter.
But there was handwriting analysis done that proved that this was your handwriting, correct?
That is correct.
Approaching opposing counsel with Exhibit 20. Approaching the witness with the same. Which one is it? First, please. Now, Mr. Grace, this is a letter that was in your handwriting, correct?
I recognize this handwriting as mine, yes.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Was it changed or altered in any way to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
And that is your signature on the bottom of the page, correct?
Correct.
At this time, the defense would like to offer Exhibit 20 of evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so defense is Exhibit 20, which is a letter to someone named Heather from Alex, will be admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Grace, in this letter, you go to say, we could have done more. You go to say, that's who I am, that's who I was. We knew, maybe if listened to rules or said yes to different animal, I don't know. Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly. Again, I'd like to remind everyone, I don't recall writing this letter, so I can't speak to the meaning behind any of it.
But this is your handwriting, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Now, if you flip over to the next page. Now, this letter goes to say, we could have done more. Chris should still be here. Did I read that correctly?
That's correct. I think we could have done more. I think Danny could have done more. I'm not sure exactly who you're implying that we is for, and I don't recall writing this letter, so I also can't confirm or deny that.
Thank you, Mr. Grace. Will the courtesy copy suffice as evidence?
Yes, it will.
And at this time, I have no further questions for this witness.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Any further witnesses at this time complained?
No, at this time, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests his case in chief, and we'd ask for a brief recess.
Half hour?
A half hour?
Kidding. 10 minutes enough?
Yes, sir.
Be back here.
Why? Back here, too. Those aren't supposed to be there.